Now we're live.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen Wilson. I'm subbing in for Laura Rogers here at the SharePoint Power Hour presented by Rackspace. We do this every week. We just do a live presentation almost every week. Sometimes we skip it, especially when Laura's on vacation or something. But we do a presentation here for business users. This isn't a presentation about administrative stuff. It's not a presentation about development stuff. It's about the things that you can do with SharePoint out of the box if you stretch as far as you can. And Kevin's kind of laughing if you can see his face there, and that's because Kevin is a specialist in stretching things as far as he possibly can. So as I said, my name is Stephen Wilson. I'm on the business solutions team. I'm actually more of the admin specialist of the team. I do a lot of the stuff that we don't handle here, but then when a customer has their brand new shiny SharePoint instance, I help them get started just with the little things like what's a library, what's a list, how do I set up a site collection, how do I do a site. Those kinds of things that get you started when you're just getting going in SharePoint and you have no idea what's next. Then we have a few other specialists who can help you out here at Rackspace, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves right now. We don't have the full team today, but I mentioned that Laura's not here. We have a couple of other people who are tied up working with customers, but right now I will ask people to introduce themselves. Corey, then Ryan, and then Kevin will go last because he's doing our presentation today. So, Corey, go ahead and take it.
All right. Good morning. I'm Corey Emmons. I am a new hire at Rackspace, actually. I'm doing SharePoint consulting, more of the out-of-the-box web parts, workflows, InfoPath, all that stuff that I apprenticed under Laura, so she's basically taught me most of what I know.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Ryan Keller. I am the branding guy on the team here at Rackspace. So that basically means if you've been watching the show for any amount of time that you probably know that my role means that I make SharePoint look a little bit less like SharePoint every day. I've been working with SharePoint for about 8 years. Been doing SharePoint consulting for I think around a little over 6 years now, and been doing SharePoint branding almost exclusively for around 4 of those years. That's me, and I will go ahead and hand it off to Kevin, and he will blow your socks off with his presentation today, I'm sure.
Kevin, I also forgot to mention the Q&A on the side, so if you can just kind of give people a brief overrun of that.
Sure. Good morning. Welcome to our 96th episode of SharePoint Power Hour. As Stephen said, this is something that we do practically every week, and it is shown live on YouTube and in Google Hangouts. And if you are watching via YouTube, don't forget to click on the Join the Hangout, and you have the ability to actually join us live and participate in the Q&A and see all the links we might put into our showcase. And although we won't be responding with on the Q&A via the text interface, the other members of our team will be monitoring, and I'm sure will let me know if there's questions, and I'll try to answer them in our presentation. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started with our presentation. Today we're going to be talking about workflow groups and permissions. Basically, the idea here is that we're going to show you how to use SharePoint 2013 workflows built in SharePoint Designer in order to be able to create SharePoint groups, assign permissions to those groups, and also assign users to those groups. And then if we have a little time left, I'll show you a practical application that I built to utilize that for an actual client. So to give you an idea, for those who have not seen me on here before, we have this is pretty much me I've been living in the SharePoint world for ever, and but I have a long background in IT, and there's my blog site and Twitter if you want to get a hold of me, and that's an old picture of me when I was still fat. So first thing I'd like to do is let you know that we did previously in a SharePoint Power Hour number 53 show you how to use SharePoint workflows to create sites. And there's the link in YouTube to go watch that video if you want a refresher. In that, we used SharePoint Designer workflows using app steps and calling HTTP service to use REST and JSON, and some creative use of those workflows in order to be able to create subsites based upon a particular site template that existed in SharePoint. We're going to use the same kinds of ideas in today's presentation, and we're going to take that a step further and use the workflows in order to be able to create those groups, assign the groups different permission levels, and assign users to those groups. So first thing, just review for those that want a little more detailed on how to actually do this. This is kind of admin-y a little bit, but anybody that's a site collection administrator should be able to perform these steps. The first thing that you'll need to do to make sure that you can follow this procedure is enable app permissions. This is a feature in your site that you're going to be running the workflows in. It's a site scoped feature, not a site collection scoped feature. And what you do is you would find the workflows can use app permissions feature and activate it. Then there's one more thing that you'll have to do in order to be able to get this to work. There is a point at which after you have added your first app step into the workflow, and just to back up a little bit, if you don't enable this, you don't have app steps available in the workflow. It'll be the option will be grayed out in your ribbon. And then once you have actually added your first app step in the workflow, and you go ahead and publish that workflow even though it's not finished, and then you have the ability to give that workflow the full control permissions that it needs in order to do what we're going to be doing. And in order to do that, you follow this, go to the site settings, app permissions, and you copy what I've got highlighted here on the slide in the workflow area, and that is basically just a particular unique identifier for the workflow. And then you go to the next step here to actually set the app permissions, where you're going to be going to appending that this particular path to your site URL, and then you can actually assign the site or the app permissions, and you'll be pasting this little phrase, this little piece of XML into this area here. That's what it'll actually look like. You'll paste the app ID and press lookup. The title, app domain, and redirect URL will be automatically filled in as soon as you click the lookup, and then you'll paste into the permission request the XML that I highlighted in the other screen. So before we get into it, one of the reasons that you might want to do this, although if you are a site administrator or site collection administrator, you can easily manually go ahead and create groups, assign permission levels, create your own permission levels, blah blah blah. However, we have run into times when our clients have not necessarily wanted to be able to give full control permissions to a site administrator. they have had a sub-site that was administrated by somebody else, and they wanted to be able to have a little more security control, or a little more control over the design, so that they maintained their standardized look and feel. So they didn't want to give full control to somebody that was administering content, but they didn't want to actually have to set, or be able to have to respond continually to a continuing changing security environment. And the biggest request that in that area that I've had was that they want people that are administering a single sub-site or a site collection that they're not going to be given full control over to still be able to assign permissions. So in our demo today, what we're going to do is show you how you can make that happen. So let me share my other screen here. Give me a second. Not Q&A. Where's the screen share? The screen share. There we go. And I shared the wrong thing. Give me a second here. I apologize for this. I do intend to show you exactly what I'm talking about here at some point. All right. So the first thing I want to show you is how to create a group using workflow. First off, just like in the demo we did on how to create a site, you're going to run the workflows based upon a list, and this also gives you the ability to track who did what and when. And I'm not going to be doing a complex list. Again, the request from our clients has always been to force the users to do as little as possible in order to make the work as simple as possible and the training as simple as possible. So basically, anybody that has been given permission to this list in order to be able to create a list item or contribute to just this list and not necessarily to the rest of the site, although they could, would have permissions to go ahead and kick off this workflow. Because if you do the app permissions properly, the app step will actually perform the actions, and the user that is creating this list item does not have to have any special elevated permissions. All they have to do have as permissions to this particular list. So, and to show you what they would have to enter: a title, a description, and what permission to assign to the group. So basically, they would enter the name of the group, the description that they want to have for the group, and I've added here to describe the purpose or use of the group, and then permissions to assign, keeping it easy for the demo. If it's a SharePoint group that they just want to have for maybe people picker lookup possibilities, or for assigning to specific objects or lists or libraries, then you might choose none. And the read, contribute, and owner permissions would be permissions given throughout the entire site. Yes, this would allow them to essentially give themselves the ability to do full control, but I wanted to make sure that we showed you how to do that if you wanted to make it happen. So in our scenario, might not work. You might take away the full control, but at least for the demo, you'll see what happens with it. So, and as you can see here, I've actually done a few of these that just in my testing to make sure this worked. And I've left the create group workflow column that's automatically created with workflow here to show you what the result will be. I also, when I'm doing these kind of workflows, I like to use create a test view, which actually gives me the ability to get all of the response back from the workflow, so I can see what is exactly happened. I create this as a personal view usually, so it's not available to the standard user. And hidden in all this is all of the information that the workflow is telling me happened throughout the workflow's activity. And if there's anything out of the ordinary, then I can go ahead and troubleshoot it. I find it very useful to do that when I'm building this, because sometimes things happen and they go wrong, and you find out you've missed one little step, and that's really all it takes in this to make it go kind of wild and wacky. So now let's go look at the workflow and show you exactly how this actually works. And where is it? There we go. So we were talking about our create group workflow. So I've opened up the site in SharePoint Designer, and this is something that you will need to have site collection administrator permissions in order to make happen in SharePoint. You know, so that when you open up SharePoint Designer, you have all the controls available throughout everything. It's not something that, you know, just generic Joe site user can make happen, because they would not have the app step permissions and all that available to them. So once we have this workflow created, we edit it, and as you can see, I've already created it for the demo, so we don't have to spend time typing a lot and worrying about my typos screwing things up. And very much like the number 53 on the create site, we're going to be creating, utilizing dictionaries, variables. We've got some, as you can see, some conditional statements. I like to use multiple stages for my workflows so that I can track where things are going or what's going on a little better when I'm building and troubleshooting. And so as you can see, that in this particular workflow we have 3 stages. We start off by setting what I call setting variables. In other words, we're going to be building some dictionaries, and I'm going to open up each of these and talk about what they do. They're very similar to the dictionaries created in the create sites workflows. So first off, we're going to build a dictionary that actually tells the workflow that we're going to be using JSON and REST. First off, we create a dictionary item that we name accept, and I will say that this is case sensitive for many of these names and values, and unless I say otherwise, just assume that it's case sensitive. So we first start off with a dictionary item named accept, and that we type in the value application / JSON semicolon OData equals verbose. And essentially that just tells us we're going to be we're telling the workflow to recognize JSON input, and that way we don't have to and for those who don't know what that is, that's JavaScript object notation. So that's what JSON is. So it's just a way of inputting data. You can actually, insert JSON into Ajax or C# code. We're going to be using the same idea, but we're going to be inserting into the workflow via the dictionaries. The second one, we're going to tell it the content type is also JSON. Notice that the application / JSON semicolon OData equals verbose is exactly the same as the accept, and that is what works. And we're going to assign that to a variable request headers, and that is a dictionary variable type. The request headers we're going to use throughout this. You'll find that in the other flows I use for this, we always use request headers. And one of the things about setting them in this stage, I can reuse that throughout the different stages and steps, and I don't have to create multiples. One of the caveats that you find when creating very large workflows that use a lot of app steps and a lot of dictionaries, it is possible to create too many dictionaries. How many is too many? When you start getting errors, when nothing was wrong until you created another dictionary, that's when it's too many. At this point, I have not seen any published threshold for that. Because I think it depends a lot upon the resources that are allocated to the workflow. But if someone has that information, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see if there is a published limit. So next we build another dictionary, again very much like the create site, except this time we're going to be creating one named type. Again, that is case sensitive. If you've ever looked this kind of thing up on somebody's blog, you might see it capitalized, and that will not work. It is case sensitive type, and we're going to give that a value of sp.group. Reason being, we're going to be using the, it's kind of like in programming where you talk about what dependencies, what sets of methods and so forth are you going to be using. Same thing like PowerShell, where we're going to be loading a set of commandlets. This tells the workflow that we're going to be loading the SP group set of commands, and to learn and to look for that. Next, we're going to be setting the parameters that we're going to be using for this group. The first thing we do is we insert, and this, notice when you have a dictionary type in another dictionary, it doesn't come up. So you have to choose it if you wished, but I'm not going to. But you know it's a dictionary. This underscore metadata, that's actually two underscores, underscore metadata. And that's how we insert the group metadata dictionary into the parameters so it can be used when we call it. And we don't, because in our app step, in our call HTTP web service, we don't have the option to call very many dictionaries in particular places. So we're inserting that as a parameter. We're saying that one of our parameters is to use the SP group controls. Next, the title. We're going to be naming the group using the title property, and we're going to be pulling the title from the list that was list value that was entered for title, and using that to name our group. And description, we're going to be pulling that again directly from the list, the current item description, and using that as our description parameter for the group.
Hey, Kevin.
Yes.
We have somebody requesting if you can do it, if you can expand your screen a little bit so it hides us at the bottom. They want to see the screen a little better, or change the resolution of your screen so the text is a little larger. Either way.
I don't know. Can I do that?
You can't do that. I'm trying to remember how.
It says I'm screen sharing.
Yeah,
that.
I was looking to see if it was something on my end that I could do.
I'll get you instructions for like the next time, and I'll send it to everybody. But for now, if maybe you could just resize the screen itself, possibly.
I'll see if I can do that. I don't know much about these computer things.
I think Laura just turned down her resolution last time on their whole monitor.
She's done both. She says she likes to see our pretty faces. But we've talked about it before, and I know there is a way to do it. And I think in the last hangout we did, she actually did it.
Yeah, I would love to be able to figure that one out.
Hit the camera icon at the top, and
that turns the camera off.
let's see. I'll find it, and like I said, I'll send it to everybody. But for right now, probably easiest thing is just to change the resolution.
Okay. Let me try that. Is that any better? Any better?
Let me see here. I'm trying to get back to it because I was looking for a solution to the other thing.
And Stacy said Laura does a share to all, which seems to get rid of the pictures at the bottom.
Share to all. I don't have that option.
Yeah. Well, you continue.
We'll
I'll
figure it out.
do a little Googling or binging or whatever the choice is.
Okay. That's what I get for not learning anything about computers. I just know SharePoint. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so I'll hope that somebody gets some better information to help you out there. I don't seem to have the controls available to make that happen. I don't think I can do it within this. And seem to want to zoom.
No, I think it's going to be. I know it's in the app itself. I even sent Laura an article about it once, and that's why I'm looking right now.
Let me see if I can just change my resolution. Maybe that'll help. Looks weird to me, but you know, I want it to be good for the screen. Is that any better? Looks bigger to me.
Yeah, looks better.
Okay, so we'll go with that. All right, well, so we did finish up the group parameters. Next, we're going to set a variable for our group URL, which I'll show you where we're going to use that. And what we're going to do there is we're going to use our string builder, and we're going to pull the current site URL from our workflow context. And if you've never done that before, that is just a lookup for a string, and instead of current item, you come down to workflow context, and then you have a lot of different things that are available from the context of the workflow, like the current item URL, which does include the ID of a list item, current site URL, list ID, list name, and so forth. So there's don't be afraid of using some of these other options. And then we're going to append the slash API, which tells us we're going to use the site groups API for REST. And that's just the path that we're going to be using, and we're going to reference our site for that. And then we're going to actually use a variable called a web URL. We'll use that down below, which is just the current site URL. That way we have that available. And if you remember, looking at our new item here, we have this drop down for what permissions to assign: none, read, contribute, and owner. And so we're going to make our workflow a little smarter than the average workflow, and we're going to take a look at if the permissions to assign equals read only. We're going to assign a variable this set of numbers. Notice they are different numbers. Now these particular numbers are important. What they really are is what we call a role definition ID. And that is where we would assign it's the numeric ID of a permission level in SharePoint, and that is the ID that is referenced through the REST API in order to be able to identify what permission level we're trying to assign. And these, just as you see read, contribute, and full control, those are the numbers that are assigned to those particular permission levels. And you'll see where we'll use that role definition ID down below. I like to set everything to variables instead of just using them directly, just because that allows me to change up what the variable is later in the workflow if I need to, instead of creating more variables, or update the value later on, or if I need to change it initially, change the initialization value in order to be able to manipulate the workflow, perhaps if I copy this and use it in another location. So then we're going to go on to the next stage once we assign the value to the role definition ID. And we're going to, the next stage is where we're actually going to create our group. For this, we're going to create an app step. And for those that have never looked at app steps, in a stage, app step is right here. Insert an app step. If that is grayed out, then you have not actually activated the feature for give apps workflows app permissions, or apps workflows app permissions. And if you're going to be doing that, close SharePoint Designer before you activate it, and then once you activate it, you can reopen SharePoint Designer. It is not something that you can refresh while SharePoint Designer is open. So once we have the app step here, we're going to insert, and the insert call HTTP web service is what we insert here. We're going to insert that here, and notice that we do have some values that we can click on and try to go ahead and choose values, but they're not going to give us all of the values that need to be set. So you want to come over here to the arrow drop down and click on Properties, and this will give you all of the values that can be set for this call HTTP web service action. The one that is not available through just clicking on the different values here is this request headers. So you would get all of the others, but you would not get the request headers, and therefore you wouldn't be able to tell the HTTP web service that you're going to be using JSON commands and properties in this HTTP call, web service call. So the first thing we're going to do is give it an address. The address is, of course, the group URL variable that we set up above, where we're actually telling it we're going to initialize the group's API. The HTTP post is one of four options: delete, get, post, and put, which are available. The post means we're going to be writing to the SharePoint environment. The get means we're going to be reading something from the SharePoint environment. And I'm not quite sure why they put the HTTP delete and the HTTP put, because the put I've never used and never had a need for, and the delete is not supported in the workflow. Although HTTP delete is supported via REST, which is why it comes up, it is not supported inside the SharePoint Designer 2013 workflow. So that's where we see a little, if we get to it a little later, where I do kind of a workaround for being able to delete some permissions. So next, our request headers, where we actually tell it JSON. We set a variable there. Request content. This is where we insert the parameters that we set with the title and description and so forth. And then our response content is the variable that we are going to hold what the REST call that we're using here will respond with information. Remember, I showed you that in my in this test view, this is what comes out of that response. So this is the information. It's all the information that we input and all the information that comes back out. So that's we need to store that in a variable. It is a dictionary variable, so it actually will show a value or a property and a value. We don't put anything in the headers, and in the response code is just a string variable that we use to get the status codes, like OK or created or bad request or not found. Those are the most common ones that you'll find. And those, as you can see, once we call that, I'm actually going to set the column workflow status to whatever was in the response code, which will show us the OK or the actual status. And then the workflow response column in our list, I'm going to set to the response content. Again, this is for troubleshooting, so that I can make sure that everything is working properly, and if not, I can figure out where. And then, because we made the workflow a little smart here to determine what permission level was being assigned, we're also going to take a look at if they assigned the none option, meaning we're not going to assign permission to this group. We're going to just use that for containing people objects. Then if it's none, we don't need to go to our next stage, which is assign permissions. However, if it's anything else, then we're going to go ahead and go to our next stage and assign a permissions or assign permissions to the group that we just created. So the first thing we're going to do is we need to be able to identify the group, and we do that by referencing the response content that we pulled out of our that came back from our HTTP web service call in our previous stage. And we're going to look for a property called ID, and we do that with this notation, d/ID. And if you notice in here, you'll see the ID property right here, and you notice at the end our ID is 26 for this group, this particular group, and 27 for this one, 28 for that one. It doesn't really matter to us at this point what the number will be. It's just a matter of going to get it out of this response content. Once we have that, we're going to assign that to another variable. That's a string variable, and then we're going to go on and set another URL, which is kind of convoluted looking. But we're going to basically say our current web URL, which we set up above, and we're going to call the API for our web that involves role assignments. And for our role assignment, we're going to perform the command add role assignment to our principal ID, which is our group ID that we just pulled, and we're going to assign it the role definition ID that we set in the first stage according to what the user chose. So here again, we're using this workflow can be modified for a lot of things because we set with variables, we don't hard code. Then once we have that variable set, then we can use that in another app step where we call another HTTP web service, and we go to the properties. And with this, you can see that just like before, we're going to use the address, the group perm URL, which lets us tell it what command we're going to actually do. It's a post operation, so we're going to be writing to SharePoint. We're still going to be using that same request headers, so it's looking for JSON properties and commands. And then we're going to pull our content back to response content 1, and our status code back to response code 1. And I'm not very inventive there. If we were doing a lot more complex workflow, I might actually name those responses, specific to what is being responded. But in this case, it's pretty short workflow, and I can keep track of it. Then we're going to set the workflow response column. This time I'm doing things a little different. I want to actually pull the initial response and the second response so that I can, if it breaks in the middle, I'll still see the first response. But if it gets through to the end and breaks, or just want to see that it completed, then I'm going to be able to see both in the same column. And then set the workflow response to the response code. Publish it. And if you don't get any errors, or you can check errors, but if you don't get any errors, just make sure before you run it or create anything, you go back here and check Start Workflow automatically when item is created. That way, the user that is in that's coming in here to fill out this form doesn't actually have to do anything but fill out these 3 fields and click Save, and then they will get this view, and eventually they will get either the OK status if they've chosen a permission level. If they have chosen no permissions, then they'll get created. Now you could update that with another value. I just wanted to show you what will happen, quote, by default. Now we can use this same kind of operation to assign permissions. Notice I've got another list here based upon the same idea of we're going to ask the user only for a very small amount of information. Who are they, and what group do they want to be assigned to? Again, I've kept it simple for this operation, choosing either the visitors, the members, or the owners groups, which would be the out-of-the-box SharePoint groups created for any team site or most other sites. And all they have to do is enter that information, choose a group. This is a people picker field, so that is going to look up people that are in the user profile store. It can't just be any name. It has to be a name that SharePoint can actually look up in order for this to work. And it's only going to work for the way I've created it for the demo. It's only going to work for one user at a time. It's only going to work for users that it won't, or I should say, it won't work for putting a group in there. It's just going to work for users. If you want groups, we do that for something else. Although I guess it probably would work for an Active Directory group. Haven't tried that. May try that at some point. Again, I've created a test view which will show me the workflow response, and this time I've also wanted to see what the actual user ID that is being pulled, again for troubleshooting, and what name is actually being assigned, and I'll show you why when we look at the workflow. And that workflow is the add user to group workflow. Again, I've already created it, so I'm just going to run you through it. This will be a little shorter run through because I don't have to explain a lot of what we're doing. Did that already. We're going to set our variables. We're going to add the user to the group in the next stage. And as you can see, it's not as complex or not as long a workflow. It's only 2 stages instead of 3. So we're doing our request URL, which is just the current site URL. We're building a dictionary with our request headers. Same thing, except in content type. And as you can see, it's still the same application JSON OData verbose. And our metadata here, though, is our type now, instead of SP group, is now sp.webinfocreationinformation. Now, the info and information may look a little redundant in SharePoint 2010. This was accessed not via workflow, but via the JSON with just sp.webinfocreation. But in SharePoint 2013, they changed it up just a little bit, so it is now webinfocreationinformation. I don't know why. It doesn't make as much sense to me as it did to whoever did that, but that's just the way it is. So next we're going to once we set our variables, create our dictionaries, we're going to transition to the add user to group stage. In this case, just like in the create group workflow, we're going to take the options that the user chose, and we're going to say if it equals visitors, we're going to actually name the group SP test visitors, because SP test is the name of the site. And if we take a look at the people in groups, we can see that SP test members, SP test visitors, and SP test owners is the actual name of the SharePoint groups. But when we did this, we didn't want the user to have to think about it. We just said, do you want to be visitor, member, or owner, instead of determining, asking them, what do you want to be, SP test, or whatever. So we're trying to take the thought off of the user a little bit. But in our workflow, we still need to address the actual name, so that's what we're doing here. So if they chose visitors, we're going to make our group name SP test visitors, or SP test members, or SP test owners, according to what they chose. Then our user metadata, just like our group metadata before, we're going to be using our type is going to be SP user instead of SP group. Our variables that we're going to be using for our parameters, again, we're putting the metadata dictionary in here just like we did before, but this time we're going to be using our login name property, because we want to be able to pull that login name for the employee name that they put in. And there is something particular about this, although it's login name, that is case sensitive. In this case, we're going to look up what that is. Our current item, the employee name, so we're pulling the employee name field from the list, but then we're going to the default for that would be to return it as a string. However, that won't work in our workflow, so we have to choose login names semicolon deleted or delimited. Now that may be something that you don't see if you in your list properties did not create the employee name with the option of allow multiple selections. Now remember, I said that it's only going to work for the workflow I created is only going to work for one employee at a time, but we have to actually put in this allow multiple selections, because otherwise for some reason for a very codey reason, the JSON API and the API actually look for a semicolon after the user or the login name. So if it doesn't see that semicolon, it doesn't do it doesn't identify the login name properly. And if you look and notice here, the login name is actually going to be returned like that. So it will have the full claims definition with the domain and username. But here, of course, it doesn't show the semicolon because it pulled that out, and the semicolon isn't part of it. So back to the workflow. So we use the semicolon delimited, and then for the user URL, we're going to be using a very similar string to what we used in the group workflow. Current site URL. We're going to be pulling the API for the site groups, and we're going to get that group, which group we're going to actually use by name. This should actually not be visitors here. Sorry about that. I did that for no apparent reason. This should actually be the group name. So we'll pull the variable here, group name. There we go. So get by name and pull the group name and then /users, because we're going to be inserting it as a user. So basically with this, again, like with the groups, we're telling what API to use in our REST call. So and this is we're calling the in the app step with the HTTP web service. Again, we go to properties, and let me expand this a little bit so you can see all the properties. Let me open it up so you can see all the properties. So why is that doing that? I must be looking at an older version of this. But anyway, this because this shouldn't even need to be here. Oh, I know what it is. One of the eccentricities of this sometimes is that it will, instead, when you insert a variable, sometimes it will expand the variable out to what it actually is. It's an eccentricity. It doesn't happen all the time. It happens. I've not found any reason for it to happen. I just see it once in a while. Normally, it's not a big deal. And if you don't like this, you can just delete it, and of course, just look up the variable that we created, which was the user URL. Here we go. And then it's a post operation, request headers, just as we did before, the user parameters, the dictionary we created for all the parameters. Again, we're going to get the response for this back in response content and the response code for the stat we're going to use for the status. Then going to log that. We're actually going to, for our troubleshooting in the personal view, going to set the group name to what group we actually set, make sure we're setting the right one, and user ID column we're going to set to the employee name to where so we can see what ID is actually being pulled back from this, and then set the workflow response. And as you can see here, I created one. If we go ahead and create another one here, I think we'll put Ryan in and we'll make him a member, and we'll save that. And then eventually, it doesn't take very long, we'll get that it was created. And if we want to go look at those to be sure, we can look at the let's see, I put them in visitors. Okay, I've saved it wrong, but it would put it, if I saved that one and published it, it'll put them in the right group. So running short on time, so I'm not going to go troubleshoot it during the video. I did, and I just have to publish it. So quickly, I want to show you something I did for an actual client. In this case, the scenario for this was basically we're putting this all together with the create site, with the create users, or create groups, and assigning group permissions. And if you've looked at the create site, this is basically the same kind of thing. We're setting the same kind of dictionaries. However, we are using a custom template for the create site instead of like the team site STS-0. This is a custom coded site. So this is the template ID for that we're using here. And we're also going to show you that we have the ability to see if that site exists. For this particular client, we had a requirement that did not allow us to set unique property in the inside the list. So in this case, if somebody puts in a name that we're going to be naming the site or using in the URL, this is you do have the ability to check if the site exists. And if you notice here, let me see if I can't open this property, these properties, and show you. We're using a get operation here because we're just reading information. And what this actually does is reads the current URL, or the URL for this site as entered in the properties, and compares that URL as we use the get URL property, and it compares that to the URL that we assemble, and basically sees if if the URL that it tries to go get exists, then they will be equal, and we don't create a site. We just go ahead and in this case, it's a subsite of a site collection that would then have another subsite. So so we don't want to create multiples of that parent. And then it's just create sites. Then let me get down to see that one. Yeah. So what we also did here is once the sites are created, creating a site. We create a group just like we did in our demo. Notice it's basically the same steps. Then we're adding what they call an adjuster to the group that they just created. So we are able to do all this in the same workflow. Create a subsite, create a group, add somebody to the group, and then we are setting the permissions for the group. In this case, we've hard-coded what permissions to actually set. We're going to give them contribute permissions, but we're doing something special for this. We're adding in this command here, and I know we're getting short on time, but we're adding in a role URL, which because we're setting permissions on a subsite, we have to break inheritance in that subsite in order to be able to do that. It's not necessary if we're doing that on our top level site. In fact, if you try to do this command on a top level site in a site collection, you'll get an error that you don't have permission to do that because there's no inheritance to break. So basically, we're going to be doing two HTTP web service calls in this stage. The first one, we're going to break role inheritance, and you have two options here to put either true or false. And they're not. It's not a. Do you want to break role inheritance? True means yes. Do you want and break role inheritance? True and false means no. What it actually is break role inheritance true means that you want to copy the existing permissions when you break role inheritance so that they're not deleted. And false means that you want to delete the existing permissions and just start over with the permissions for that subsite. So that would get rid of all your visitors, members, owners, approvers, and anything else in the subsite. And that is what we wanted to do in this particular case. And as you can see, the role assignment, same as we did before in our assigning permissions to groups. And if just the role definition ID here, we're just giving them contribute. And the first thing we do in our app step is we actually break role inheritance. And using the false, we're going to use the role ID with the false, meaning we're going to break role inheritance and clear out all the existing permissions. And then we're going to actually set the permissions using, with this group here, the group ID of the group we just created above in the same workflow, and that will be the only group that has permissions to the subsite. But that's not necessarily what they wanted, so we go ahead and put the owners and the members groups back by looking up the name. In this case, the name of the site is cases, case owners, and cases members, and we just put those back with this particular step. And I'd go through it a lot more in depth, but I think you get the idea that of what to do. It's just the same thing. We put the owners group back, and when we give them permissions, and we do that with this same commands, just use them in a lot of different order. So as you can see, let me stop sharing here. Just to round this out, using the SharePoint Designer workflows, we have a lot of capabilities. We talked about just in depth on the create site ones. Now you also know how to do the groups and users and permissions using workflows, and you can do that all in the same workflow using multiple stages. Just be sure to activate your features, give your app steps permissions to be able to do their job, and that way you don't have to give your users any permissions to the site except what they need in a list to create an item. and that means you can free yourself up from a lot of administrative headache. Any remaining questions? I don't. Let's see.
Nothing
Okay.
in the Q&A.
All right. So in that case, I thank you all for tuning in, and join us next week when we'll be doing another Power Hour. That is, I don't know that the topic has been set yet, but I'm sure it'll be interesting.
All right.
Until then,
Thank you, everybody.
keep sharing.
Thank you.